Now, the historical exchange between the real and the ideal does not apply in the case of the last project that I want to talk about, which is completely radical and, in some sense, out of control. This is a project in which the manipulation of dark and light actually manufactured Boulet's most emblematic project. It's called the Cenotaph to Newton. It exemplifies Boulet's interest in how buildings that are dark and gloomy can produce a transcendent effect, in other words, produce the sublime, and how architects can actually calculate abrupt passages from lightness to darkness, to narrowness to hugeness, as it were, in order to manipulate human responses to space. The first thing to note is the unprecedented radicalism of the image of the complete globe. This is the very first design of its kind. The subject is equally grandiose. It is nothing less than the order of the cosmos. Think back to the medieval image of the city and the universe. And all the kinds of properties or characteristics that we've enumerated so far that relate to a sublime architecture are reunited in this project. That literally transforms the sphere, that central sphere, into a double emblem of the earth from the outside and the universe from the inside, only to stress our very precarious metaphysical place in that universe. Lastly, Boulet ingeniously put nature to work. Instead of using columns, he imagined an ascending succession of double concentric rings of funeral cypresses, trees, in other words, which turn the building into a kind of natural Elysium and conflate landscape and architecture. Now, the building has a deeply complex processional space, and this is revealed in the section rather than the elevation, which cuts through the center of the building. What you do is that you enter from the sides and you experience buried architecture. Boulet is imagining forcing us to navigate downwards and then proceed down a long, dark, and seemingly endless or infinite corridor. And then transcendence is suggested at the end. We climb a stairs in darkness, and when you emerge into the space, you're emerging into the sacred center, as it were, which is marked by a platform on which is Newton's tomb. And this is where we see this absolutely ingenious manipulation of light and dark, and how the building literally kind of oscillates between day and night. Remember Boulet's claim that the architect creates light. What he did was to imagine piercing the skin of the globe so that during the day, light would come in, would filter in to recreate the patterns of the stars, the constellations themselves. In other words, daylight here theatrically illuminates and creates the inside effect of a night sky brightly lit up by the stars. By doing so, what Boulet is in fact somehow theatricalizing is an oscillation between the subject, the person in the building, and the object, the cosmos itself, between inside and outside, between earth and sun. He's also displacing, and this is where he's referring to Newton, of course, the drama of the Copernican revolution, of the idea that the sun actually displaced the earth as the center of the universe. This is the idea of the sublime. The structure of the universe is mapped out before our eyes, only somehow to shake to its very foundation our sense of where we belong. What is our place in that universe? This is Boulet's description. With the drawing before your eyes, you would see what would have been deemed impossible. You would see a monument in which the spectator would find himself transported in the air and carried on the mist of clouds in the immensity of space. The interior form of this monument is that of a vast sphere into which you arrive at the center of gravity by an opening in the podium on which is placed the tomb. Just as in nature, no matter where you look, you see only a continuous surface which offers no beginning and no end, and which, the more you peruse it, the larger it becomes. This is, of course, the mechanism of the sublime, and here, for the first time, I think, we have an architecture that actually performs infinity. So to conclude, how would we think of the legacy of Boulet's designs, of this approach, these visionary drawings that were conceived for a recreation of society, that were conceived to illustrate an entire typology of public edifices? It's important in this context to realize that Boulet actually made these drawings for students. Their pretext is pedagogical. They were intended for the students at the academy and served to exemplify ideas about buildings, not actual buildings. This kind of architectural imagination underscores the importance of ephemeral or unbuildable architecture, of architecture on paper. And the extraordinary thing is to see how one continues to track it down to our moment. Take, for example, Le Corbusier's plan for the city of Chandigarh, whose urban grid he also set up in front of a mountain range to evoke the sublime that we see in Boulet's City of the Dead. And then, if you look at the rooftop of the Palace of the Assembly, Le Corbusier played with the possibility of, quote-unquote, seeing God by means of the sheer monumentality of those forms that emerge both from something deeply archaic, you have the pyramid, and something deeply futuristic. The promise of technology in this case carried forth in the suggestion of nuclear power, which is alluded to by the truncated cone. Or finally, with someone like the Italian architect Aldo Rossi, whose own architecture of death relied on the pyramidal form, this time in plan, what one critic dubbed the neo-Enlightenment attitude in his work. And what I think he meant by this is an architectural imagination in which architecture, geometry, and philosophy collide and coalesce, work in concert to create an image of transcendence. This is an attitude or an architectural imagination that was directly inherited from Enlightenment architects who were trying to remake the world around them.